My name is Grace, and I used to think that I had everything thought out, that I was standing on a solid foundation that would never crack. I had a great job as the head of the marketing department at a well-known company, where I achieved success thanks to my hard work, dedication, and ability to make quick decisions. I was proud of my career, proud that I was able to achieve financial independence by paying the mortgage without anyone's help, knowing that every dollar invested in our house was earned by me. It gave me a sense of control over my life, confidence in the future, and a sense of stability. My husband Mark was not just a loved one for me, but also a partner, support, someone with whom I could share all the joys and difficulties. We had been married for several years, and our life seemed perfect to me: cozy evenings together, family trips, traditions that we built together. A big family was also a part of our lives. Mark had a younger brother, Tom, and their mother, Linda, was always there for us, surrounding us with her attention and care. After the death of their father, who passed away many years ago, Mark and Tom took care of her, tried to be there, help, support, and it touched me to the depths of my soul. Seeing how sensitive and caring Mark was, I fell in love with him even more. When I first became a part of their family, Linda seemed to me to be a friendly woman, open and ready to accept me. She asked about my work, listened with approval, and sometimes nodded, saying, "That sounds important." It was nice to hear that. It was nice to feel that she accepted me, that I was becoming a part of this close-knit family. The first years of marriage were spent in a warm, almost perfect atmosphere: Sunday barbecues in the courtyard, festive feasts when all the relatives gathered at a long table, and conversations and laughter filled the house, making it truly alive. I remember one of those evenings when we celebrated Thanksgiving at Linda's house: a long table covered with an autumn-patterned tablecloth, steamed wine glasses, plates of turkey and gravy, and laughter that sounded like music. "Will there be gravy?" Uncle Mark's voice came from the far end of the table. "You've had enough gravy, old man." Linda snapped, but there was no anger in her voice, just amusement. She grinned and handed him the saucepan, and there was a chorus of laughter from around the table. I looked around at everyone, remembering this moment, feeling like I was part of something bigger. Now it was my family, too. I believed that our house would always be full of warmth, that these people laughing at the table were my family. But the first crack in this immaculate facade appeared on New Year's Eve. We gathered at Linda's. The house was full of guests. The smell of pine needles and hot mulled wine was in the air. Music was playing. I was in the kitchen refilling my glass of wine when I heard Linda talking to Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you see what Carol is wearing?" She giggled and then added, "That dress must have cost $5." I froze, feeling my hand squeeze the bottle a little too tightly. Carol was Mark's cousin, a single mother, a woman who worked 2 jobs trying to feed her children. "I'm just saying," Linda continued, her voice taking on a mocking tone, "that some people need to know their limits. Don't try to play with the big boys if you can't keep up." I felt my face heat up. It was not just banter, not innocent words, but contempt, anger, and a desire to humiliate. It wasn't the warm and welcoming family I thought I knew. I peeked around the corner, watching as Linda, leaning over her sons, continued to talk, and they giggled like schoolchildren who had been told something indecent. Mark was smiling, Tom was grinning, and at that moment I felt something break inside me. Over time, it became increasingly difficult for me to ignore my growing anxiety. What I had previously perceived as harmless teasing was gradually taking on a different, more sinister form. Linda no longer limited herself to making caustic remarks about Carol. Now other relatives came into her field of vision. At every family dinner, she gathered her sons around her, and they bent their heads and whispered, looking around the room, casting sidelong glances at one guest or another, followed by muffled laughter. I tried to convince myself that it was just her way of communicating, just black humor, just a way to bring the family together. But one day, on Easter Sunday, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Linda was sitting in the living room like a queen on a throne, and Mark and Tom were flanking her like loyal knights. Have you seen Janet's new car? She said, lowering her voice, but not so much that she couldn't be heard. I probably took it from buy here, pay here. I'm sure she'll pay up to 80 years old. I felt rage boiling up inside me. Before I realized my actions, I had already risen from my seat and was heading towards them. Linda, I said, my voice coming out sharper than I'd planned. Don't you think it's too much? Janet can probably hear you. Linda turned around, her eyes narrowed, a grin flashed on her lips. She looked at me appraisingly, and then said, "Oh, Grace, honey, you become so sensitive. We're just chatting. You do understand, don't you?" I glanced at Mark. He didn't say a word. Silence reigned in the room, thick and viscous, like sticky syrup, instantly filling every crevice, every crack in this house, which had long since ceased to seem familiar to me. Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked at me with an expression of apparent surprise, behind which was hidden the usual sarcasm, barely restrained satisfaction that she had managed to hurt me again, knock the ground out from under my feet, make me feel like a stranger. "Well," she said, folding her arms across her chest and slightly tilting her head, her voice dripping with sarcasm, heavy, thick, almost palpable, "it looks like we've offended your delicate feelings, Grace." It took only a moment for Mark and Tom to exchange awkward glances, as if they themselves didn't know which side they should be on, and, as always, chose to remain silent, not interfering, not risking losing their mother's favor. "I just think it's rude," I squeezed out, feeling my insides tighten with tension, my palms turn cold, and my heart is pounding somewhere in my throat, treacherously squeezing a trembling voice out of me. "Why do you always humiliate people?" Linda's fake smile disappeared so quickly, as if she had been wearing a mask from the very beginning, which now no longer made sense to hold on. "If you don't like it," she drawled, no longer hiding her open dislike, "then you don't have to listen. Why don't you sit somewhere else?" I felt as if I had been hit, as if the air had been forcefully torn out of my lungs, leaving me defenseless, stunned. I looked at Mark, hoping to see at least a drop of support in his eyes, at least a weak attempt to stand up for me, but he just stared at the floor, as if he wanted to disappear, merge with the carpet under his feet, become invisible. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding tougher than I expected, and from that day on, family gatherings turned into a special kind of hell for me, a nightmare from which there was no escape. I sat alone, clutching a glass of wine or a cup of tea, listlessly listening to conversations, laughter, watching Mark cling to his mother, how his face glows when she taps him on the shoulder, when she smiles approvingly, when she whispers to him, discussing something that concerns only the two of them. Without noticing me, without noticing how I was gradually disappearing, how I was dissolving into this family, which, as it became clear to me, I had never really needed. From time to time, he cast apologetic glances at me, but never once did he come over to sit next to me, did not take my hand, did not try to show that I was still his wife, his choice, his man. "Why don't you ever stick up for me?" I asked him one evening, after a particularly heavy dinner, when I was returning home feeling like I'd been squeezed out like a lemon and thrown away. Mark sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and his face contorted with annoyance for a moment, as if I was forcing him to choose between me and his mother again, even though the choice had long been made. "She's my mother, Grace," he replied, as if that one explanation was enough for me to understand, to accept, to stop demanding, "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell her that she's cruel," I whispered, because my voice was trembling treacherously, because I didn't want to start screaming again, as it had happened before. "I want you to watch my back." But he didn't do it. And gradually, I began to find reasons not to go to these family events, work, urgent matters, migraines, anything to avoid long evenings at the table filled with sharp looks, caustic whispers, icy stares and insults thrown as if they meant nothing, as if they should not leave wounds. And so, when I thought it couldn't get any worse, when I decided that the worst was over, life threw me another test. I was pregnant. I looked at the test, at the 2 pink stripes, so clear, and I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding, and my fingers were shaking as I took my hand away from my forehead, where cold sweat broke out. "Mark," I called, and my voice traitorously cracked. He appeared in the bathroom doorway, frowning, worried. "What happened?" I handed him the test. His eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flash of sincere joy in them, which was immediately replaced by something else: concern, anxiety. But he smiled, hugged me, and it seemed to me that maybe everything would be fine. Maybe this child could bring us closer. Maybe he will heal all the cracks that have appeared between us. But life had other plans. The pregnancy turned out to be difficult from the very beginning: constant nausea, dizziness, weakness, the incessant threat of miscarriage, because of which I lived in constant fear. The doctor prescribed bed rest for me, and I worked remotely as long as it was possible, but over time my condition worsened, and I had to quit, leave what I was so proud of, give up my career, my independence. I needed Mark more than ever before, but he drifted away, disappeared, spent evenings at work, came home late, referred to urgent projects, meetings with colleagues, and more often than not I fell asleep alone, hearing the front door close somewhere in the middle of the night. And then came the day of the cesarean section, faster than I expected. My eyesight deteriorated to such an extent that the doctors insisted on surgery. Natural childbirth was too risky. As I lay on the cold operating table, my heart was pounding furiously, filling my chest with a wave of anxious anticipation, which strangely mixed fear, excitement, hope, and a slight dizziness from the realization that in a matter of minutes my life would change forever. The white light of the lamps directed directly at me seemed too bright, the sterile smell of the hospital hit my nose, and the voice of the doctor, who was giving some technical instructions to the nurses, reached me as if through a fog. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, felt someone's cold fingers gently touch my arm, and heard the nurse's soft voice. "Where's Mark?" I asked, not immediately recognizing my own voice, so shaky and full of desperate need for support. The nurse smiled sympathetically, the way people smile who are used to reporting bad news veiled by politeness. "Your husband is in the waiting room, dear," she said with a warmth I hadn't felt in any of Mark's words in months. "He said he'd rather stay there." Her voice was soft, but something inside me snapped abruptly, like an invisible thread, thin, but holding my faith in him until the last moment. I stared at the ceiling, blinking, trying to hide the tears that came, not letting myself go limp. Maybe it's stupid, maybe I should have guessed in advance, but it was at that moment, while the doctors were bustling around, while the devices were emitting a steady rhythmic signal, that I became really scared. Not because of the upcoming surgery, not because of the baby that was about to be born, but because of the realization that I was left alone. The operation went smoothly, and soon I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, my son's first cry, so clear, loud, insistent, as if he had been declaring his existence to the world from the very first seconds of his life. When he was placed on my chest, a small warm body, still moist and smelling of new life, pressed against me, and I felt such a rush of love that it took my breath away. Later, in the recovery room, when my stupor was gradually letting go and I was exhausted and struggling with the desire to fall into a long-awaited sleep, Mark finally appeared. He came into the room, and it was immediately clear to me that something was wrong. His face was a mask of discomfort and irritation, and there was something in his eyes that I could barely decipher, a mixture of discontent, fatigue, and something else that I didn't want to say out loud. "Listen, Grace," he said, not even looking at his son, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms, his little fingers clenching and unclenching in his sleep. "I have to say something. It's all wrong." I blinked, confused, still too weak from the surgery to immediately understand what he was getting at. "What do you mean?" He ran his hand through his hair, his movements were abrupt, full of irritation, as if he had been holding back this monologue for a long time. "Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgical nonsense. And men. We shouldn't be here for this." His lips curled, and there was something almost squeamish in his voice. "We have to meet our wives and children at home, just like in the old days." His words hit me like a punch in the gut, leaving me without air. "Mark," I whispered, trying to find the strength to explain to him that I couldn't risk the baby's life, that a cesarean was necessary, that I was doing everything possible to make this day come. But he interrupted me before I could finish. "I'm going home. This place gives me the creeps." And then he left. The next few weeks turned into a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, restless days filled with a crying baby and my own fatigue, which weighed on me like a weight. Mark was rarely at home, and when he came, he did nothing to help, did not take his son in his arms, did not try to calm him down, was not interested in him at all. "Can't you shut him up?" he said irritably one night when our baby was crying, writhing in the cradle. "I'm trying," I gasped, feeling exhaustion squeeze me like an iron hoop. "He's teething, he's in pain." But Mark had no patience. "All you're doing," he snorted, "is messing with the baby. What about me? What about our sex life?" I froze, looking at him in disbelief. I was sleeping 2 hours a day, my body hadn't recovered from the surgery yet, I was living in survival mode, and he was thinking about it. Mark's discontent grew, accumulated like a storm, and one evening, when I was once again trying to calm my moody 6-month-old son, he gave out the stunning news. "You need to get back to work," he said flatly, in a tone that brooked no argument. I slowly turned to him, shock showing on my face. "What?" "But the child." "We'll hire a babysitter," he interrupted me, as if the matter had already been resolved. "We can't live like this, Grace. We need money." I wanted to argue, to tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready to leave him, but Mark's determined look made it clear to me that it was useless. It was with a heavy heart that I started looking for a job. It wasn't easy to find her with my failing eyesight, but eventually I managed to get a job at a small company, even though the salary was significantly lower than what I had before. When I informed Mark about this, his reaction was predictable. "That's it?" He chuckled. "We'll pay the babysitter for this." I felt tears coming to my eyes. "I'm trying my best, Mark. It's not easy with my eyesight." "Excuses," he muttered, already walking away. That's how my new reality began. Every morning I ran to work, feeling guilty for leaving my son with a babysitter, struggled with my impaired eyesight all day, and then returned home to my offended husband and child, who needed me more than anyone. Time flew by in the chaos of work, childcare, and growing tension at home, and before I knew it, I lost myself somewhere along the way. 2 years have passed since the birth of my son, and despite all the difficulties, fatigue, sleepless nights, and an endless feeling of exhaustion, I loved him more than I could ever imagine, finding joy in every awkward step, in every babbling word, in every happy laugh that filled the house with sunshine. Light even on the most cloudy days. He was the meaning of my life, the only support that kept me from finally falling into the abyss of despair, on the edge of which I had been teetering for too long. Family meetings were still a source of stress for me, and Linda, as always, was the main cause of my inner tension. She appeared in our house with haughty confidence, as if she still considered it her territory, and tried to play the role of a caring grandmother, but her ostentatious warmth was so strained that it seemed almost caricatured. She smiled tightly, stretched out her arms to my son, wanting to take him in her arms, but he just clung to me tighter, turning away from her with that wary expression on his face that children show when they feel something unnatural, something fake. I saw Linda's face darken with anger, her lips pursed into a thin, angry line, and then, after a moment, she fixed me with a withering gaze. "What are you telling him about me?" Her voice was filled with icy accusation. "You're turning my grandson against me." "Linda, he just doesn't know you very well," I replied wearily, no longer even hoping for understanding. "If you had visited us more often, he would have gotten used to you. Don't you dare blame me for this." She would snap, turning around and walking away, only to complain to Mark a few minutes later, who, as always, said nothing in my defense. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, when I put a tea bag in a mug and turned to the table, my world turned upside down again. I looked at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart was pounding, and cold fear was spreading in my chest. I'm pregnant again. The memories of my first pregnancy, full of pain, weakness, fear, and loss, flooded over me, flooding my consciousness, and I felt my fingers tighten around the plastic strip, as if it could somehow change reality. Can I handle another pregnancy? Will I be able to go through this again? But when I counted the weeks, the realization hit me like an icy wave. I was already far into the first trimester. The decision seemed to have been made for me by nature itself. With shaking hands, I grabbed the phone and dialed Mark's number, hearing his impatient voice after a few rings. What happened? What is it? He asked, and there was already irritation in his tone. Mark, I'm pregnant, I gasped. There was a long pause, too long, too heavy. Listen, Grace, he finally said. I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just don't quit your job, okay? We can't let the money run out. I sat clutching my phone, and when the call ended, I felt more alone than ever. Fortunately, this pregnancy turned out to be easier than the first one. My morning sickness was bearable, my eyesight remained stable, and I continued to work, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my stomach got bigger, the distance between Mark and me seemed to grow exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, coming home late at night more and more often, as if he was trying to avoid me. One evening, when I was struggling to put our son to bed, balancing on my swollen stomach, Mark came into the room. Hi, I said, hoping that he would finally take on some of the worries. Can you read him a story? I'm so tired. Mark looked at us, then at the clock. His face reflected a moment of indecision, and then he shook his head. I can't. I promised my mom to help her move the furniture. Don't wait for me. When the door closed behind him, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I looked at my son, who was curled up in a ball, quietly looking at me with his big, trusting eyes. Then I looked down at my rounded stomach, where the child I already loved with all my heart was growing up, and suddenly I was seized with fear. What if this baby would grow up feeling alienated from his own father? In the 7th month of pregnancy, I found myself in the middle of preparing for Thanksgiving, pushing aside fatigue and pain to prepare the house for the holiday, to make myself feel at least a drop of joy. The guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents arrived before everyone else. My mother immediately rolled up her sleeves and took up help in the kitchen. My father settled into the living room, chatting with my friends and relatives, who gradually filled the house, bringing with them noise, chatter, and laughter, enlivening the space, which lately seemed empty to me. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the bell rang in the house. I wiped my hands on my apron, went to the door and, opening it, froze for a moment, startled by the surprise. Tom, Mark's younger brother, was standing in the doorway, and next to him was a woman I'd never seen before. Hello, everyone, Tom announced happily, beaming from ear to ear. This is Melissa, my fiancée. There was a moment of silence, and I noticed Linda rapidly approaching the door from the depths of the house, her eyes lighting up with something strange, her lips lifting in an approving smile, a rare sight. Finally, she said, hugging Tom, then looked at Melissa appraisingly, her eyes twinkling with something that could be mistaken for satisfaction. Welcome to the family, dear. There was silence in the room for a moment, but after a few seconds it was broken by joyful congratulations, cheers, clinking glasses, slaps on the shoulder, and laughter filled with sincere joy for Tom and his bride. I forced a smile on my face, trying my best to ignore the painful sting in my chest, which was caused not by envy, no, but by the strange, painful realization that Mark was looking at his brother with some kind of admiration, with that genuine pleasure that I hadn't seen in his eyes for a long time. Probably ever since I came along. Linda entered the room a few minutes later, and when her gaze fell on Melissa, her eyes widened for a moment, and then her face broke into an approving, almost triumphant smile. Well, well, she drawled, her voice sounding warmer than it had ever sounded to me. Aren't you a sight to behold? Throughout the dinner, Linda did not take her eyes off Melissa, gave her smiles, cast glances in her direction filled with undisguised admiration, and if she had been restrained before, now, as if she had forgotten about everyone else, she focused all her attention exclusively on the new chosen one of her youngest son. Melissa responded in kind, asking her questions, hanging on her every word, laughing at her remarks and willingly keeping up the conversation, as if she knew from the very beginning how to please Linda, how to win her favor, how to become an ideal daughter-in-law for her. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, serving food, making sure everyone had enough drinks, smiling at the guests, but I still couldn't help but hear their conversation, especially when Linda deliberately raised her voice so that everyone at the table could hear her. So, Melissa, she said, leaning forward theatrically, Tom told me that you work as a manager at the National Bank. How prestigious. Melissa nodded sheepishly, smiling slightly. Yes, I've been working there for about 5 years now. Linda beamed, her eyes lit up with a strange, predatory gleam, as if she had just found confirmation of her expectations, as if her guesses had been fulfilled, and now she could say what she had wanted to say for a long time. You must be doing a very good job, she drawled in a sweet voice, and then, barely noticeably tilting her head to one side, she added with mock regret, unlike some people who can only bear children and breed poverty. The silence that followed those words hit me harder than the phrase itself. I felt my face flush with humiliation, as my fingers gripped the fork so that my knuckles turned white, as my chest was squeezed by resentment so strong that it seemed as if I was about to suffocate. My mother tensed next to me. I saw her open her mouth, about to say something, but I carefully put my hand on hers, silently begging her not to make a scene, not to make it worse, not to give Linda what she wanted, a scandal that would make me, not her, look hysterical. You know, Linda leaned forward again, clearly enjoying the moment. Sweet Melissa now earns $155,000 a month. That's what I understand. This is exactly the daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of, smart, beautiful, successful. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and in order not to burst into tears right at the table, I pressed my lips into a thin line, looking down at my plate. The years I spent supporting our family, paying off the mortgage, building a career, sacrificing everything I had for Mark, for the sake of the child, for the sake of our future, suddenly turned out to be completely unimportant. All of this was negated by one comparison, one humiliating look, one dinner, at which it became completely clear, no matter who I was, no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, for Linda I would always remain a loser who did not meet her expectations. I think we should continue this wonderful evening in a more appropriate place, Linda suddenly said, getting up from the table. Melissa, honey, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown? Of course, I'm buying. Before I could realize what was happening, before anyone could object, Linda, Tom, Mark, and Melissa were already heading for the door, continuing to chat cheerfully as if nothing had happened, as if this evening wasn't a family holiday, and I wasn't standing here, humiliated, confused, with her chest bursting with pain. Mark didn't even look back at me. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The celebration was no longer there, as if it had been erased with a single movement. One by one, they started to get up from the table, politely apologizing, saying that they had to go, that the evening had been wonderful, but it was late and tomorrow was work, and in the end, only my parents were left in the house. Let's help you, honey, Mom said softly, taking my hand. I shook my head. No, I managed with a tight smile. You need to rest. Everything is fine. They left a few minutes later, and I sank down on the couch and finally allowed myself to cry. The hours passed, the night turned to pre-dawn gray, and I was still sitting there, clutching my swollen stomach, feeling under my fingers the subtle thrusts of a child who was not even born, but already lived inside me, was already a part of me, already loved me, even if no one else loved. When the front door finally opened, The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon. Mark stumbled on the threshold. His movements were uncertain. His clothes smelled of expensive alcohol and cigarette smoke. His eyes were cloudy, as if in front of me stood not the man I once married, but some kind of stranger. He didn't say a word, just walked into the bedroom without even looking at me. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone, opened social media and froze. On the screen in front of me was a photo: Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa, all of them sitting at a table in an expensive nightclub, with glasses of champagne, with wide smiles, as if they were living the best moment of their lives. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." The day of the birth was approaching. Excitement and anxiety were mixed inside me. The doctors insisted on a cesarean section, explaining that my body was too weak, and too little time had passed between previous births to take the risk. I tried to focus on preparing for the arrival of a new child. I tried to tune in to the joyful expectation, but the feeling of anxiety did not leave me, hiding somewhere deep, like a dark cloud that is about to burst into a storm. There was something subtly strange about Mark's behavior, something I couldn't understand, but I could feel it in every cell of my exhausted body. One cold winter day, when I returned home earlier than usual, I found him unpacking several bags full of summer clothes, while snow was falling outside the windows, covering the streets with a thick layer of white silence. "What's all this about?" I asked, frowning, pointing to a pile of shirts, shorts, and light trousers that were clearly not designed for the local climate. Mark shrugged, barely sparing me a glance as he continued to pull things out of the bags. "I just saw a good sale," he replied casually. I decided to update my wardrobe. Something in his voice, in his behavior, seemed unnatural to me, but I was too exhausted by the approaching birth to delve into my suspicions. I'm too tired, too focused on making sure everything goes smoothly, to make sure that I have a plan that will allow me to take at least a couple of months off to recover from the cesarean and devote myself to the newborn. My employer approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a huge relief to me. I diligently saved money, carefully transferring it to a separate account, from which I planned to pay the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old son, so that I would not have to struggle between the baby and taking care of the elder. For the first time in a long time, it seemed to me that I could handle it, that I was ready. But 3 days before everything was supposed to happen, the world collapsed again. I was relaxing on the couch, holding my hands on my huge stomach, enjoying a rare moment of silence, when the front door suddenly burst open with a bang, and Mark burst into the house, followed by Linda like a shadow. "Hurry up!" she barked, her heels clicking on the floor, and Mark, without saying a word, rushed into the bedroom. I struggled to my feet and trudged after them, feeling myself roll heavily from side to side, a dull ache constricting my lower back, and a premonition of something terrible spreading through my body like cold goosebumps. When I entered the room, I saw Mark hurriedly throwing clothes into a suitcase, the summer clothes I had seen that day. "Mark," my voice broke in panic, "what are you doing?" He didn't even stop, didn't look at me, continuing to feverishly zip up the suitcase. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii," he said over his shoulder, as if he were saying something self-explanatory. "We're all going." The world rocked under my feet. What? I took a step forward, feeling my breathing quicken. "But my cesarean section is in 3 days. Who will take care of our son?" Mark finally froze, turned to me and, meeting my gaze, shrugged indifferently. "You can handle it. You always do well." Before I could say anything, shout anything, or do anything, he stormed past me, and Linda quickly shoved him out the door, slamming it in my face so abruptly that my insides tightened with pain and resentment. Stunned, I slowly turned around, feeling reality crashing down on me with such force that it becomes difficult to breathe. Grabbing my phone, I opened the banking app with trembling hands, quickly scrolled through the list of transactions, and felt the blood drain from my face. All the money I had been saving was gone. My fingers trembled even more when I dialed Mark's number. He didn't answer. It wasn't until the last ring that his voice rang out. What? Money, I managed, feeling my throat tighten with panic. All our savings. Where are they? There was a short pause, and then I heard his cold, mocking laugh. We needed them for Tom's wedding present, he said lazily, as if he were talking about something completely insignificant. Don't be so greedy, Grace. The line broke. And at the same moment, a sharp, piercing pain hit me in the stomach, making me cry out. I looked down in horror and saw a puddle begin to spread out beneath me. The waters have receded. Panic seized me. I couldn't start giving birth now. The risk of a ruptured suture from a previous cesarean section was too great, and doctors warned me that natural childbirth could lead to terrible consequences. Pressing one hand to my stomach and the other desperately clutching the phone, I dialed 911, feeling fear paralyze me, constrain my breathing, make my body heavy as lead. The hospital was in chaos. The doctors' voices merged into a noisy hum, the monitors emitted shrill beeps, the pain came in waves, and I lost myself in this torrent of pain, fear, and helplessness, until everything finally dissolved into darkness. I woke up a few hours later from the quiet beeping of the monitors. The first thing I saw was my mother's tear-stained face. Her eyes were reddened, and there was a trail of tears on her cheeks. Grace, she whispered, squeezing my hand. Am I okay? My voice was hoarse, barely audible. With the baby? She nodded, sobbing, and bent over me, gently stroking my fingers. You almost died, she said, her voice shaking. The kid almost died. But you survived. 3 days after the emergency cesarean section, I felt surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery. They gave me the green light to be discharged, but I couldn't get rid of the suffocating feeling of emptiness that settled in me. Mark didn't call. Not once. Not to find out how I am. Not to ask about your newborn son. At that moment, when I was lying in a hospital room, weak, exhausted, but still alive, realizing for the first time how close I was to losing everything, I realized that our marriage had finally broken up. There was no point in clinging to the illusion of family. There was no point in justifying Mark's actions, hoping that he would change someday. He left when I needed him the most. He stole our savings. He abandoned me just before giving birth and didn't even call to find out if I was alive. That was all I needed to know. I called my parents and asked for permission to stay with them for a while, just to come to my senses, to allow my body to recover, and my mind to stop spinning in an endless whirlwind of pain and betrayal. Their response was immediate. Of course, yes, come, we will help you. They welcomed me with open arms, arranged a room for me, surrounded me with care, and for the first time in months, I felt safe. While my mother helped me with the baby, and my father played with my eldest son, I began to plan my future. I was looking for divorce lawyers, collecting documents, reviewing bank statements, mortgage agreements, and recording all the evidence that could play into my hands in court. I wanted this process to go as quickly and as painlessly as possible. I didn't want revenge, I didn't want quarrels, I didn't want a showdown, I just wanted to put an end to it. And so, exactly 1 week after I was discharged from the hospital, my phone rang. Mark's name appeared on the screen. I ignored the call twice, letting him go to voicemail, but when he called the third time, something inside me twitched and I pressed the answer button. Where the hell are you? He sounded annoyed and puzzled at the same time. Why aren't you at home? I took a deep breath, holding the phone in my hands so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I'm with my parents, Mark, I replied evenly. With our sons. I filed for divorce. There was silence on the phone, and for a moment it seemed to me that he had dropped the call. But then there was a sound that really stunned me, a loud, booming laugh. A divorce? He breathed out, still laughing. Are you kidding me? After all I've done for you? I clenched my teeth, feeling a hot wave of anger rise in my chest. Everything you've done? My voice was quiet but firm. You mean you left me before giving birth? That he stole our savings? Oh, get over it, he chuckled. I can return these pennies to you without any problems. In fact, I don't even need to do that. Because, you know what? I don't want to see you anymore. I froze, but he continued without even noticing my reaction. Do you know why? Because I'm going to get rich. He spoke excitedly, almost enthusiastically, as if we weren't discussing a broken marriage, but were sharing joyful news. He talked about how Tom's new wife offered him a position as a deputy at the bank, how they were going to open their own financial company, how she literally showered them with gold, and that very soon they would become so rich that their lives would resemble a fairy tale. You never believed in me, Grace, he spat. You've always rejected my ideas, you've always held me back. Well, guess what? I'm free now. And you? You're just a loser who doesn't see the potential, even when it's right in front of your nose. I didn't answer. I just disconnected the call and deleted his number. To my surprise, the divorce process went faster than I expected. Mark did not dispute a single point. He returned the money he had withdrawn from our accounts without objection, agreed to pay child support, and when it came to the house, the judge did not hesitate to award it to me, since I had years of mortgage statements proving that I was the one who made all the payments. The day I returned to my house with the boys, Mark was there, finishing packing the last of my things. He turned around, saw me, the child in my arms, the eldest son, who was holding my hand tightly, and his face was distorted in a strange grin. Enjoy this dump while you can, he said, weighing the box in his hands. I will soon be living in a mansion, swimming in money. You'll see what you've missed. I didn't answer. I just watched him walk out the door, as it slammed shut behind him, as the house suddenly became bigger, brighter, as the air became cleaner, as I felt for the first time in a long time that I could breathe. It's been a year and a half. Life has entered a new normal, calm, measured, full of worries, work, children's laughter, and love. I returned to the office, found a balance between career and motherhood, built a system in which no one suffered, where I could be with the children, but at the same time not lose myself. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I was so tired that I thought I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. There were times when fear for the future squeezed my throat, when loneliness made itself felt, when I fell asleep, feeling empty in the place where Mark once slept. But overall, we were happy. On an ordinary day, no different from hundreds of others, when life finally found stability, when the house was filled with children's laughter, and work became not just a means of survival, but something that brought pleasure, my phone vibrated with a news alert. Without looking up from my morning coffee mug, I automatically reached for it, expecting to see something familiar: a weather report, traffic news, or an advertising offer from a local store. But when my gaze skimmed over the headline, I froze, feeling everything inside shrink into a tight, unyielding lump. The local banker is exposed. Fraud destroys the family. The art of a complex scam, the details of a shocking scandal. My heart started pounding faster as I scrolled through the text further, realizing with each paragraph, with each line, that it was about them. Melissa, Tom's new wife, the one whom Linda idolized, praised, and held up as an example, turned out to be not just a lying careerist, but a real con artist who pulled off a complex scheme that was now falling apart, leaving behind the ruins of other people's lives. She convinced Mark, Tom, and Linda to invest all their funds in a non-existent financial company, promising mountains of gold, incredible profits, and success that was literally at arm's length, with just a little risk, a little faith, and a little investment. They didn't just invest. They took out huge loans, they mortgaged Linda's house, they invested everything in this adventure, every penny, every dollar, every scrap of their hope for the future. But Melissa wasn't a banker at all. The office she was showing them was just a short-term rental, a beautiful prop in her elaborate game, and all the documents she was waving in front of them turned out to be artfully forged. She disappeared with millions, leaving behind a trail of false promises, debt obligations, and shattered dreams. And to make matters worse, as I read on, a strange, poignant mix of emotions began to boil in my chest: shock, confusion, and, I admit, satisfaction, because it turned out that they even took out an additional loan to pay for Tom and Melissa's lavish wedding in Hawaii. The very event that Mark left me for whom he left me alone, pregnant, with a 3-year-old child in his arms, for whom he stole our savings and invested them in other people's dreams, completely without thinking about the consequences. And here they are, these consequences. Debts that they couldn't pay off. The confiscations that took everything they owned, Linda's house, cars, even personal belongings, were swept away by creditors, leaving them with nothing but piles of unpaid bills. According to rumors, Linda was now working as a cashier in a small supermarket to afford at least some tiny apartment and groceries. Mark and Tom found themselves in the same position, with shattered illusions, with lost pride, with dashed hopes for a rich life in which they saw themselves as successful entrepreneurs. I sat there, reading every line, feeling a huge wave of gratitude wash over me for having managed to get out of this chaos. I was no longer part of that family. I was not affected by their financial disaster. I had children, I had a house, I had a life that I had rebuilt. And just when I thought I'd finally put it all behind me, my phone rang again. I looked down and felt my stomach tighten. Linda's name appeared on the screen. I looked at the phone, at those letters, and despite all the horror they brought me, despite all the insults, despite everything she had done, I still answered. Linda's voice was low, not at all like her usual confident, authoritative tone. "We need your help." I was silent, waiting, feeling a chill of apprehension run down my spine. "We filed a lawsuit," she continued, now breaking into a pleading note, "asking that we be allowed to stay with you. The children need their father and grandmother. You can't leave your family in the lurch." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes, and at that moment, like a whirlwind, memories came flooding back to me. The humiliation on Thanksgiving Day, when she openly ridiculed me in front of everyone. Disappointment and fear when Mark abandoned me before the cesarean section. Despair when I discovered that he had stolen my savings and invested them in someone else's life. All the times when they looked at me with contempt, when they rejected me, ridiculed my feelings, my efforts, when they saw nothing in me but a loser. I opened my eyes, clutching the phone tighter in my hand. "Family?" My voice was calm, even cold. "You didn't take care of your family when you left me alone, pregnant and in danger. You didn't take care of the family when you stole my savings. You didn't care about the family when you called me a loser." Linda started to say something, but I interrupted her. "I'm sorry you're in this situation, Linda. But I am not responsible for your mistakes. My priority is my children, and I will not allow the chaos that you have created into their lives." I paused briefly, then added, "Please don't call me anymore." I pressed the end of call button. And then, without a second's hesitation, I blocked her number. When I put down my phone and took a deep breath, I suddenly felt incredibly light. No more regrets. No more connections. No more debts, either financial or emotional. It was done. Really done.